So it always has that great recording information when it starts to record, so you know that it is happening. But again, welcome. Thank you for joining us. So the two alums that are with us tonight, first off, I just want you to introduce yourselves. So your name, the year you graduated, and kind of what you studied, and a little bit about, like, did you have an internship? How did you end up in the position that you're in now, and kind of what do you do? So that's a lot, but kind of who are you? What did you study? What do you do now? And Yemi, do you want to get started?
Absolutely. Hi, and good evening, everyone. My name is Yemi Ajabe, and I graduated from the university in 2016. And I graduated with degrees in finance and economics. I graduated from the School of Business. I did have internships in college. I actually was in a unique situation. I came in with a fair amount of credits. I'm from Minnesota. And so for those of you that are familiar, I did a dual enrollment program in Minnesota. And I actually ended up doing my program at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. And so I came in as a junior. And so I was able to intern with Target as a merchandise planning analyst my freshman year at Wisconsin. My sophomore year, I interned with Wells Fargo as a financial analyst. And then my junior year is when I interned with General Mills as a management associate in sales. And so that is where I landed full time. And I absolutely loved my internship experience. I know we'll get more into that, but I'm currently a customer account manager level 2 for General Mills, calling on Target. And so I manage our frozen and dry baking businesses. And so those brands, for those of you that will resonate with them, are Betty Crocker, Totino's Pizza Rolls, Cascadian Farm frozen vegetables, and then Annie's Homegrown. We have a few frozen items coming out, which I hope to place at Target. And then the key projects, duties, what do I do? From a day-to-day basis, customer account management is all about our DMSP, that's distribution. How many items do you have of your brand in a certain place? That's merchandising. What price point are you going to sell them at? What are you going to invest? How much funding are you going to give your retailers and your customers? Shelving. What does your items look like next to the competitive set on shelf? And then the last one is, do you have the right everyday price point for the consumer? So that's just a little bit of what I do and what I work on. I'm located in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is where we're headquartered as well.
Fantastic, thank you. So before we started, I was talking to Yemi about her new position with General Mills, and she was talking about Totino's, and I was like, oh, that's so good. And I was like, oh my God, I'm jealous. She's like, yeah, I got all these samples here. I'm like, jealous.
I know. If I were there in person, I definitely would have come with multiple boxes. So maybe I should have kept that to myself, but I do get a lot of sales samples. Yeah, so next year.
Yep. Joel, working at the Federal Reserve, he probably just has like monies as free samples, right? They print money.
Dude, I wish, yeah. I wish I could go to my bonus or something, but they make it up. But yeah, so my name's Joel. I graduated this past spring. I did a math and economics double major. Let's see, internship. I didn't have an internship until my junior year. We can talk about that. I procrastinated so much on this stuff, and I'm good for you for being here because it shows you're not. For the most part. So my internship was actually at a startup, which did daily fantasy sports analysis. So basically, people would come to him for advice on who to pick for their lineups. And we did a lot of data analysis for that and sort of modeling in R. Sorry, what do I have to do next? Oh yeah, so now I work at the Federal Reserve. I'm a research associate. And what a research associate does is sort of assist with research. So each Federal Reserve bank, there's a lot of regional banks, and each has a staff of economists who, in part, they try to sort of assist the president for his decisions on monetary policy, because he usually votes on something to do with interest rates. But also at the St. Louis Fed in particular, there's a large emphasis on just getting published. So it's sort of like a university position in that respect. And so what we do is a lot of data analysis for them, sort of gathering data. And then we have some other sort of bank-specific duties that have to do with reporting on the local district economy. So we have something called the Beige Book, where basically we have to talk to local business leaders and then sort of have a little write-up. And I would say that's pretty much it.
Why is it called the Beige Book? I feel like that sounds just like so like kind of boring.
Yeah, it is. It's so exciting.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it's I think
Just
it's
the
the
name,
original.
it could be rebranded. Yemi has to help rebrand
Yeah,
it or something.
actually, no, they I think it was originally literally in a brown book. So I think that's the origin of that. Now it's all online. So I think they have different colored books as well, but I'm not sure. There might be a green book, but
Nice. Awesome. Thank you
So
guys
this
both
job
for-
sounds so cool, but just to clarify, in the chat, I put Joel is much cooler than I am. And that was in reference to your fantasy startup position. That sounds so awesome.
I can go into that later. I don't know. You say that, but I was in a guy's basement all summer. So,
So maybe not.
there's pros and cons. I mean, there's sweatpants to work and stuff, but I don't
Tip
know.
number one, manage your expectations. It sounds
Exactly.
cool, but maybe
Exactly.
different.
Mm-hmm.
it's all about how you write it up in the resume and talk about it in the interview. You know, you don't want to lie, but you can
Oh yeah.
present it in a certain way, right? You know?
Absolutely.
Okay, so Joel, since graduation is kind of nearer to you, next question I have is, when did you know what you wanted to do after graduation, and then how did you figure it out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so a lot of the time through my undergraduate career, I was sort of preparing myself to go to grad school. So I wanted to be eligible for that. And that's part of what originally got me into math as a double major too, even though I really enjoyed my math major. I would say I probably decided not to go to grad school sort of late in the summer where I was doing the fantasy sports gambling. And part of that was sort of a convenience thing. Like I hadn't studied for the GRE. So, and I think I did a pretty bad job reaching out to professors through my undergraduate career. So I didn't have that many really close references. And I think those were two things that would have really helped a graduate school application. And so that was sort of something I encourage the younger kids to do, is really try to talk to professors, try to get internships early like Yemi, and that can really help you in the future. So I think I decided really late in that summer that I wanted to see what jobs were available. And the Federal Reserve seemed like a great choice for me because they sort of attract this pool of people who don't know if they want to do a PhD. So that's part of the position, is like a lot of those kids after 2 years go on to do PhDs. So that was sort of the reason I was looking at those in particular.
So it sounded like that faculty resources were helpful, like talking to faculty, or maybe you wish you would have talked to faculty, I guess. What else, like at UW-Madison, or people or resources were helpful for you in like the career exploration process?
I did talk to some professors. I would say your weekly newsletter was like critical. That's how I got a job. So yeah, thank you. Seriously, follow those and apply to those jobs. So yeah, otherwise I'd say I had some discussions with professors about what to do and some advising conversations, but for the most part, that was it.
Okay, Yemi. When did you know what you wanted to do after graduation? It sounds like you were. I like that we have kind of like two different types of like kind of preparation, right? Like Joel's kind of like, oh, I kind of didn't know what I was doing, and I did this thing in this guy's basement, and then figured it out. And Yemi's like, I came in with all these credits, and I had an internship after my first year, and like, but I love that, because I think that shows the complexity and the nuance of that. Everyone has their own path, and there's not one right way to do it, and you can still be successful. And I think in the university environment, especially at UW-Madison, when there's so many high achieving students around you, it's sometimes like you look at someone else and say, well, they're doing this, so I should be doing that too. And it's like, well, that might be their path, right? So anyways, I just wanted to bring that up because I hear that a lot from students, that they're kind of trying to compare themselves. And I think it's like, hey, you're going to figure it out on your own timeline, and that's totally cool. And trying different things too is important. So Yemi, when did you know what you wanted to do after graduation, and how did you figure it out? Because you had all these experiences too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, before I even jump into that, not comparing yourself or your past to other people is something that I'm just now getting over, because I think as high achieving students, which I'm sure you all are, you have that drive to either be better than the next person. And it's not that they're not going to do well, but that you want to stand out, you want to overachieve, and you want to do the best that you can do. But that looks different, and success looks different for many different people across the board. So what I would say is, the benefit of having so many different experiences is that I figured out what I didn't want to do. And then that was able to help me understand what I did want to do. So coming in as a freshman with all these credits, I was like, can't let it go to waste, got to get started really quickly. So I had my internship with Target, and I really, really liked it. Their environment is called fast, fun, and friendly. You're always, walking, having a coffee chat. Target is really cool and young and fun. But then I said, okay, I want to add finance to my major because it overlapped the most with Econ. And, at that point I was graduating in 2 years and kind of wanted to extend my college experience. So I added finance, and I said, even though I had a really great experience, I got a return offer to Target. Let me try the finance industry because I really like finance in theory and I want to understand if I like it in practice. I didn't. Did not like it in practice. I still do love it in theory though. And I still, love listening to the financial market podcast and things like that. But in practice, it just wasn't for me. I needed something that was a little more creative. I had a little more flexibility. It was a little less rigid in terms of balance sheets and income statements. And so then I was like, okay, why don't I try consulting? Because in consulting, you could try so many different areas. You just get to pop in and pop out for a little bit. So that might sound really cool. And so I just laugh every time I tell this story. I went to the career fair junior year, and I, had my list of people that I wanted to see. And I think one of the pieces of information I got that year was to have like a practice table. I don't think that's the official name for it, but something to warm up so that when you go to your big hitters, you're ready to have that conversation. So my practice table was General Mills because I did not see myself going into food. I was not interested in CPG. That's not really where my focus was. But I met some amazing people, wonderful recruiters who I knew were authentic and genuine, interested in my development. And that type of environment was one that I knew I would thrive in and one that I connected to. So I started full time. And the reason I'm still here is because all of those things still hold true. We have wonderful career movement. I have a career path. I know what I'm going to do in the next 2 years at General Mills. And if that's a lateral move or a promotion. I connect to our brands, and I'm a consumer of some of our brands. And so I want to be connected to what I'm working on. And with General Mills, I got the opportunity to do that. So I would say the way I figured it out was having all of these experiences, and they don't need to be as large of a magnitude as a full internship. It could be a shadow. I did a couple job shadows because at one point I also wanted to do law, and that was like literally one point in time, and it came and it went. And I shadowed a lawyer, and I understood, what does it mean to have to go through law school? What do you do on a day-to-day basis? And so all of this exploration, and even being here tonight, is one form of doing that. And that helped me figure out where I wanted to be.
Thank you both. I think that's so huge of that exploration. And, I think Joel, you'd said something earlier about like, take advantage of opportunities, like even coming tonight and showing up, right? Like we had, I think like probably double the amount of students register that are actually here. So if you're here, it's like, that's the next step, right? Like you're showing up to the table. It's Yemi just showing up to General Mills table at the career fair, just kind of using it as like, oh, this is just my practice round. And then it turns into something, right? Like it's those kind of happenstance opportunities. I think that we try to provide a ton of opportunities for students, but it's just kind of like, hey, show up, you never know what might happen, right? The worst is that nothing happens from it and you learn a little bit, right? And that's important too. So awesome. Thank you both for sharing that. That's amazing. So my next question has to do, and we'll stick with Yemi since you were kind of chatting. Think back on your time of searching for internships and jobs. It sounds like the career fair was helpful for you. But what strategies and resources did you utilize in searching for internships and jobs? What worked and maybe what didn't? Because the same process might not work for every student.
Yeah, I would say one thing for me was to cast a wide net, which I think was reflected in some of the stories that I just shared. But I think casting a wide net. So the job board is a great resource. Is it Handshake now?
Yes,
What is
it used to be BuckyNet. It's Handshake's a lot better. BuckyNet was a little
it was
a little stale. It was a little stale.
On Handshake, usually there's a contact, usually there's someone that you can reach out to. and then LinkedIn and connecting that to somebody in your personal network. I know in the business school, one of the practices that we do is that job shadow is actually part of a business school assignment, and it was reaching out to somebody who's in your field, who's alumni from UW and or connected to you in one way or another via LinkedIn, and just reaching out that hand and extending that hand. And more often than not, you'll find people more than willing to share their knowledge and their expertise with you. And so that's how I was able to find out about different organizations that I was a part of throughout school. So I was a part of a program called Inroads, and a program called Management Leadership for Tomorrow. And they're mainly for underrepresented minorities, but there are a number of programs across the country that help you get introduced to different recruiters and industries and help you start that exploration process in a very structured way that you can take advantage of, even in a virtual environment. So I would say cast a wide net, understand where your resources and organizations are, and then utilize what comes out in the emails from Ilsa. They're not just there for her to read over. They're truly for you to get some type of benefit and value from.
Thanks for that shout out. We're always like, Elizabeth and I, always like, we know this is good information, but like the students sometimes, like if they hear it from alums or they hear it from employers, then suddenly like it falls differently, or it just reiterates something that maybe they've heard again. So awesome. Joel, what about you? What worked for you for finding jobs and internships? What advice do you have for students for what went well, what maybe didn't work so well?
I think so. For me, I had less success sort of just with career fairs in general. I think it kind of, it's sort of a common theme now that I'm thinking about it, but it's sort of like a lack of preparation. So you should have some sort of pitch going in. And I think I started to do that for later ones, but I think it was just not something, it was something I really required practice for me. I think for me, going on with the wide net point, I mean, my senior year, I was applying to lots of jobs. And for me, part of the wide net's great because you don't know what's going to work out. I mean, you really shouldn't go in to your senior year of college thinking like, this is the place I'm going to get a job for sure, because you really don't know how the cookie's going to crumble. I mean, the normal recruiting cycle for RAs is in the fall, and I got mine in the spring. So it's sort of like, you don't really know how it's going to work out. And so I think, just to echo the point of a wide net, I think that's really good. And so I think ultimately that's what worked for me, was applying to lots of jobs, getting lots of practice with interviews. I found that's something that just gets much better with practice, and eventually something works out. It's just kind of how it goes. So
I'll do another plug for our advising services leading off of that, because I think a theme that I heard Joel saying is kind of this idea of like preparation and practice, right? Like when there's all these great opportunities, and just even doing, if any of you have ever played sports before or done music or been in a play, right? Like there's a reason why you practice, right? It's just so because it becomes more natural, you get better at it. So whether it's like talking about your experiences, talking about yourself, talking about your interests, all of those things that you might do at a career fair or a networking event or even an interview, like those are things that we can help with in career advising or practice to kind of make it, seem a little bit more natural. Even though interviews are probably not anybody's favorite activity, it's still something that's good to kind of be a little bit prepared for. So thanks for that plug, Joel. Okay, so now we're going to open it up to some questions from students. So Peter had a question, and I'll let either of you answer this depending on maybe who has more information to propose. But the question is, how have your positions changed since the pandemic? I guess Yemi might have more to say about that since Joel started during the pandemic, but
mine's only been a pandemic position.
Okay,
so, yeah.
A pandemic position. I love that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we are in an all virtual environment. We're working from home. I would say it's collaboration and communication were important before, but it's even like 10 times more important now. So in order to get things done, or in order to make sure I have the right information for my customers, for my retailers, things are positioned in the right place, I often have to work with a lot of cross-functional partners. So that's my supply chain, that's my transportation, that's my finance points. And so building relationships and making sure I'm building good rapport with my teammates is super important now. probably more than ever. I think also I would say it's really interesting because I think we're just talking about business and being business professionals in a different way overall than you would ever have experienced. So you're not really getting like a normal answer, but we're talking about giving each other grace and understanding that you can't do it all, and understanding that there's only so many hours in a day, and lots of people have many other factors going on in their home lives than, you know, just trying to sell Cheerios. So being, for me, I think is the humanity and the connectivity to my teammates feels a lot more tangible and a lot more real right now, because everyone, you don't have a choice but to be real with how you're feeling in this current moment. So that was a lot like softer answer than I think you were looking for in terms of the business and what I actually do day to day. General Mills currently is always known as like a staple household item. So typically in recessions, we tend to do better because people stop spending money at restaurants, or they want to conserve their income. So General Mills typically does really well. Right now, consumers are in lots of places unable to go out and eat food. They're cooking more food at home. And we saw a stock up because of the COVID impact. And so the business is busier than ever because we're dealing with labor shortages because of sickness. We're dealing with ingredient shortages because of demand. And on top of that, you know, everyone is working from home and trying to figure it out. So the business is busy, but I think overall it's understanding that, like I said before, you can't be married to an expectation of where you think you're going to be or what you think is going to happen. You really need to be flexible and adaptable and ensure that you're doing what's best for the business, but then what's best for your team and what's best for yourself as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, well, so many good things that you brought up there, but I really like the aspect of like doing what's best, also not in a selfish way, but in a self-care way of like what's best for you and having grace for yourself and for others, because yeah, we're in a global pandemic, right? And sometimes it's easy to kind of forget that. It's just like, oh, well, we got to go back to all of the things. But even for students, when, you know, you have finals coming up and, you know, all of these things, like, you know, make sure you're taking care of yourself too, because it's life is a marathon, not a sprint, right? And so we want you to still be healthy and happy, and that then you can bring that happy and that healthiness to your job and your family and all of these other things, right? So that's something that I see sometimes is really high achieving students, you know, kind of that burnout, and I balance is important, or at least kind of knowing that you're still eating well and sleeping well. And I sound like a mom right now, right? Like eat your vegetables, everyone. So thank you for saying that, because I think that provides very like real and humane kind of idea and approach. So another question that Harper had was, it has to do with classes. So actually students are enrolling a little bit later this year for spring classes. Typically they'd already kind of be getting ready to enroll, but it's getting pushed back because of COVID and all the changes. So I'll have Joel start with this one, but what was your favorite econ class back at UW, or some of your favorite econ classes? And then how does the classes you took relate to what you're doing now? So I'll let Joel start, and then Yemi can follow up.
I think my favorite economics class was actually a seminar. So this is kind of late. I guess this is more for seniors, but I took a seminar that Jesse Gregory did. And it was sort of talking about microeconomics research and a lot of the different methods that microeconomists use to sort of pretend that they have a random sample when they don't. And on its face, it doesn't sound that interesting unless you're really into econometrics or something. But I think it's great because I got to read a lot of literature. And I think that's something that you don't really get, certainly in sort of like the early economics courses. It was cool. It was very cool to read sort of important pieces of literature that a lot of economists think about when they're going through their research. And I think that that course in particular was something that made me realize that I think I could get interested in economics research, and it sort of pushed me to these kinds of positions. So.
Yemi, do you remember back to the?
It's so funny. I'm literally. I pulled up my transcript because I had to pull it down the other day and I had it saved to my computer. So I pulled up my transcript and I was trying to remember the professor's name. And so I Googled it and I found it. So my favorite courses, Joel, I love that you mentioned econometrics because that was actually one of my favorite courses. Multivariable regression analysis.
Good for you.
Sound...
Good for you. Seriously.
It.
That's an accomplishment.
It doesn't sound very sexy at first. What I liked about it is that it teaches you how to think. And that's really all that school is there to help you do. So if you're asking if I use anything that I learned in school, in my day job, I do not, except maybe for like a marketing class or, you know, a couple finance classes here or there. But what I love about economics specifically is that it teaches you how to think and how to analyze different situations that you encounter. So econometrics helped me do that in a very analytical way. And then I think on the other side of it, a little more qualitative was law and economics. And Dan Quinn taught that class, Google tells me, and I'm gonna roll with it. But law and economics is really interesting because it was very applicable to real world circumstances. And so we took, for example, like a zoning law or like some type of law in the world and tried to figure out the utility for different stakeholders that were affected by that law. And so if you think about now, like it's so relevant because of what we're going through societally and socially today. And so, yes, Peter, did you take it? It was a great class. It's so relevant to just what's happening and how do you understand how different people are impacted and affected by whether it's laws, policies, or different situations that are currently happening. So I really liked that class, and I think I used it as a elective or something like that. It's definitely not required, but it was really, really interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, Dan Quint still teaches law and econ, if that was the faculty member.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and he actually oversees, I think now maybe he used to too, but I know right now he's overseeing like the undergraduate curriculum. So if there's new classes being proposed or whatever, he kind of oversees all of that. So yeah, he's
I'll drop him a note. I'll tell him that I talked about him today.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, he loved that.
Me, but I think people love it. I think if you have something nice to say about somebody, you should always tell them.
Yes, true. Okay, we have some other really good questions coming in here. So let's see. Ethan asked, what advice do you have for finding an internship specifically as a sophomore? So Yemi, maybe I'll have you kind of answer that, since like, what did you do to prepare yourself? I mean, obviously you did a bunch of things in high school, but like, what advice do you have for those first or second year students wanting to gain experience or wanting to get some of that, set themselves up for a really good internship?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like Joel would echo these sentiments, but preparation is key. So if you're looking to do something, especially get an internship as a sophomore, which is a little less frequent, you have to be prepared. So that doesn't mean you have all the answers or you have all this knowledge or you have all this industry experience, because you don't, but you need to understand what you're applying to and what those expectations are. So I think first of all is getting your list, checking it twice, making sure you have all the qualifications and requirements needed for either the role or the position. And then it's going out there and it's selling yourself. It's why do you want this position? What makes you interested about it? What can you offer the role? And how are you going to be the best candidate for the job? I think always is what set me apart when I was looking for internships from everyone else, so that I could answer all of those questions and I didn't hesitate about it. I think one thing that really stands out is confidence and security in what you bring to the table. And so if you have that and you got it, you can sell it to anybody, I promise. Now I sound like a saleswoman. But understanding where the opportunity lies and then being prepared for it is the way you're going to capitalize on that opportunity.
Joel, anything you wanted to add to that? That was awesome.
No, that was great. That was like, I wish that was like a poster I could read every morning or something. So yeah, no, just follow that. I have nothing.
You have the picture of that like boat behind you. You could just like put it on a little Post-it note and put it underneath.
Actually.
You'll do that later. Let me add that to your list.
No, for real.
So Joel, actually, there's a couple questions for you. One student asked about, did you take real analysis? And if so, how was the class? And another student wanted to know about what kind of projects or research you've been focusing on recently.
Sure. So the first, for the real analysis, I did take real analysis, and I'm actually kind of an analysis nut. This is sort of my nerd side coming out, but I loved real analysis. So maybe that's sort of it's not like a random sample. So I think some people won't like it as much as me. It's a challenging course. You have to practice a lot. I love the mindset that a lot of sort of proof-based math is, though, because it's really like, these are my axioms, this is what follows. It's very straightforward and logical thinking. And I think it helps you, like Yemi, what she was saying earlier about how school kind of teaches you to think. I think economics is great for thinking about what are different people's incentives. And that's like a life skill. I think math is great for just thinking in a very logical way, and like thinking about why something you think is true. Like, can you actually prove it's true? Do you know sort of the assumptions you make to ensure it's true? So yes, I took real analysis. I would encourage you to take it. Sorry, what was the next question? Oh yeah, research. So now one of my economists, she's sort of a labor market economist, and her research at this point is how sort of variance in earnings changes over the life cycle. So it actually, income inequality gets worse for older people. And so part of her job is sort of constructing a model that can explain some of that. And so she's looking at a pretty good German data set. That's what I'm doing some work on. And it's actually about how it's important which firm you match with earlier in your career. So how that can matter, because if you match with a firm that sort of invests in your human capital, or you have a lot of training, a lot of opportunities for advancement, that can really matter in the long run for your lifetime earnings. So no pressure, but it can matter. So
that's awesome. That's interesting. And I think too that kind of goes back to when you are searching for jobs or internships. You know, you might be interviewing, and I think sometimes students feel like they're at the disadvantage, like, oh, I'm just at the mercy of these companies if they want to hire me or not. But there's also, you're interviewing that company. You're looking to see how, if I'm going to be investing X number of hours in this company, how are they also investing in me besides just getting a paycheck, right? I mean, the paycheck's nice, right? But also, like, what are those areas for growth or learning or anything like that? Because that can, have, impacts down the road too. That's great. Thank you. So Yemi, you had a student posed a question to you too. Do you expect you will ever go back to school, perhaps a master's program or an MBA? I think when we first met, a few years ago, I thought you were talking about maybe PhD or something like that. Or is one of your parents maybe a faculty member?
I was talking about going back to school. Yes, that was me. Great memory. And yes, I do. It has since become more of a concrete reality. I feel like I just threw like wild things out there when I was in school. But yeah, so the reason I had to pull my transcript down the other day was because I am currently in the process of looking to go back to school and applying to prep programs, and hopefully going in the fall of 2022. So stays within the family. No, I'm just kidding. It's fine. But so right now I work in sales at General Mills, and what I would like to do with an MBA, typically the idea is you use your MBA to get to senior levels of leadership, or you use your MBA to switch functions or industries, are the most stereotypical ways to use your MBA. So for me, I would like to get a little bit closer to consumer behavior and consumer research. Whereas what I'm doing right now is a little more tactical and executional. And I love what I do. I get to build relationships, but I want to get a little closer to the strategy behind some of these brands versus being on the front lines and getting them into retailers. So I do is yes is is the answer to that question. And then I'd probably look to switch into marketing or brand communications, brand planning, something along those lines, brand management.
Well, UW-Madison has a good brand management program, I know.
You might see me wandering around.
Yeah. I'll be like,
poking around, you know what I'm doing.
what are you doing here? You're like, just grabbing a sandwich in Granger
Just checking
Hall.
out some stuff.
Awesome. Well, I feel like the continued learning, whether it's like an investment from your company or going back to school, like there's so many options. So, okay. So next question. So Yemi, I'll let you kind of continue. What should students focus on while they're in school to be competitive for internships or jobs? So, thinking about coursework, leadership opportunities, GPA, like what should they focus on, or what do you think maybe made you really stick out in the recruiting process?
Yeah, I would say GPA and coursework is kind of the foundation. It's really the baseline. So just make sure that's in order regardless of whatever else you do, because that's really your entry point into the door. And then everything else is what lands you the job and gets you into the company. So I would say leadership roles and development roles, and being able to speak to your specific impact that you made, and being able to, for me, I had a lot of experiences where I led committees or led teams for various things at school, and that's where you can show your leadership potential and your leadership development abilities, so that someone can look at you and say, okay, she's good for the job that she's applying for now, but she's going to be good for other jobs that she's going to go to within the company, is what you really want them to say. So that can be exhibited and showcased in a number of different ways, and a lot of them stems from your role in different organizations in school. And then the other thing I would say is be really, I would say, be up to date on what is going on in the industries that you're looking at, so that you're able to have a very meaningful conversation about different topics that may come up about either the industry, the company, or whatever you're looking to get into. And that just shows that you're invested and you're doing your due diligence and doing the research as to what you're looking to get into. And I think that impresses recruiters, especially when it comes to the chatter after the interview, or even the pre-interview of why you're interested in the position.
Awesome. And you've probably done some interviews. Have you interviewed for internship programs or full-time positions?
Yes. So I actually lead our sales recruiting for diversity conferences. So I probably interview anywhere, and I did lead campus recruiting for UW-Madison for the past 2 years, and then just switched over to diversity recruiting. So I probably do like 30 interviews a season. It's a lot.
So you know what you're talking about.
That's what impresses me.
Yeah. Joel, what do you think students should focus on? Or, another idea could be, was there something that you wish you would have, now that you're in the working world and kind of transitioned out a little bit, there might be things where you're like, oh, I wish I would have done this, or, but what should students focus on to be competitive for internships or jobs?
Yeah, I think just sort of echoing one of Yemi's first points, your GPA, don't think of it as like sort of the end all be all. A lot of times I do think it's a threshold, and that threshold is going to vary for different positions. I mean, if it's a really academic position, it's probably like a higher threshold, but even then, you're still really selling yourself as a person, and you're selling what your strengths are and how those can sort of assist in that role. So I would just sort of caution away from just thinking your GPA is the only thing. So I guess just try to diversify your resume. I say that as someone who probably should have more, but I think it's still just, it's good to show that you've been a leader in some organization, or sort of emphasize your internship experience. But that's really all I have.
Awesome. Thank you. What about, I know students sometimes have questions, at least for me specifically, about like the Federal Reserve seems to have a very specific kind of interview process. Like, was there any things that you would suggest students prepare for? I know each bank kind of might have their own process, but any interviewing advice?
So the St. Louis interviews, I had an interview with the New York Fed as well in the fall. That one was a lot shorter. So sometimes I think you have sort of an entry interview with other RAs. And all of this was sort of virtual for me, but because of COVID in part. But So there's sort of like a shorter entry interview. And then after that, I got further with St. Louis. And after that, it was just a lot of really short, casual interviews with economists. So I don't know if if a different bank would be different. But I would say for the St. Louis interviews, you're going to have much harder interviews at other companies than the St. Louis Fed. They'll probably ask you like why you're interested in research, if you want to get a PhD, that's a common one, stuff like that. But they're not that. You're going to have harder interviews.
Now that you've been in the role for a few months, are you thinking PhD or graduate school?
I'm still thinking about it. I'm getting to take, one thing that's nice about this job is they let you take coursework. So there's some St. Louis Fed economists who teach at WashU. So I get to audit his class. I do think I'm going to think about grad school. I enjoy the coursework. And so yeah, probably leaning towards it at this point, but a lot of the RAs decide to go into the private sector afterwards. So it's not, I would say there's a lot of undecided RAs, and we sort of attract that cohort of people out of college.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have time. I mean, you're like, I'm only a few months out, Ilsa, come on.
Exactly. Well, also, I think St. Louis, this might be different at different banks. Like there is some differences with these positions, but St. Louis, they've had RAs that well overstay their welcome. I mean, usually it's like a 2-year position, and there's people who are there for like 5 or 6 years. So, I mean, there's not a lot of pressure here.
Yeah, that's nice. Yemi, what about interviews on your end? Like, since you actually are, also interviewing people, you've been on both sides of it. What advice do you have for students to prepare, or anything that students tend to get tripped up on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Most recently, what caught some of our recruiting team a little off guard was that students didn't really seem excited about the job. And it's not that they were just like, oh, I'm just here just to be here, but it felt as if there could have been more energy and enthusiasm and some of just of that, like that grit and that scrappiness behind the interview. Sometimes you're like, oh, this is my 5th interview of the day, or, or even on the flip side, there are a couple interviews where, the student felt like they had it in the bag. And it's just like, we need to understand that you want to learn, develop, and contribute as an individual contributor. And that comes across in how you work with others, your personality, and what you bring to the role. So I think it's always just bringing your best self from the beginning to the end of the interview, from preparing your questions, preparing your responses in a very structured way, so that we get to understand your best self during that 30 minutes. And so I think, my example would be to write out all of your answers to behavioral questions. A lot of them are very, very, very similar. Tell me about a time when you had to work with a difficult coworker. Tell me about a time when you tried your best, but you ultimately failed. Tell me about a time when you were juggling multiple priorities. All of those questions are out on the internet somewhere. You can come to me, I will give you these questions and write them out. And even if, you feel like, oh, dang, I don't have a strong example for it, if you're able to walk us through that STAR method and be very clear and succinct about it, more often than not, it's, wow, they were confident, they were prepared, and they didn't stumble, is probably more of the feedback than the meat of what you're giving, even though the meat has to be there. But the sides have to be there as well.
Yeah. Well, and for students too, I think thinking of when you're listening to a faculty member, whether it's, in a lecture, or if it's, in person, or if it's now via the Zoom or the Blackboard, and if they're just, and this is what we're talking about today, even if it's really exciting information or information that you need to know, you kind of zone out. And so it's probably the same if you're doing back-to-back interviews. It's you got to bring your A game and bring that energy and enthusiasm, because you're kind of on, you still want to be your authentic self, but also
Absolutely.
Still, being like, hey, this is how I would show up to work. So let's, kind of, but even maybe a little bit higher, right? Like add a little bit, have an extra cup of coffee or something.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that insight and that information. And you'd mentioned the STAR method for behavioral interviewing questions. So yeah, behavioral interview questions are that, like, tell me about a time when, and really interviewers want you to kind of package an answer that talks about the STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. So kind of highlighting all the different aspects of what the story that you're trying to tell, highlighting what was the situation, what was the task that you were undertaking, what action did you take, and then what was the result or the outcome. So if any of you said, thinking like STAR method, what is this? Just Google search it, STAR method, behavioral interview questions. There's tons of stuff on the internet about it, or come into advising, career advising with Elizabeth or myself, and we can definitely help you with kind of practicing those answers and everything like that. Okay, so next question that we have. What advice would you give to someone who is interested in a career in your field or at your company? Joel, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. So I think for one, specifically for like a research associate role at the Fed, like it'd be great to try to do undergraduate research. I mean, that seems pretty obvious, but like it's good to know, for one, if you want to do it, because you might find out you don't, in which case don't try to be a research associate. But also it's great. I mean, that's really what they're looking for in applicants. They're looking for people who are enthusiastic about research and want to do that. So I think some of the other stuff is kind of a threshold thing. Like it's good to have taken econometrics and it's good to have taken some level of math, but that's really not what's separating people. I think it's really, honestly, some of the best RAs I've seen are really just the ones, they're not like the double math majors. They're just very enthusiastic about the position. So I would say that's the biggest thing. Find out if you want to do research.
How did you figure that out? When, like, was it, because did you do research in undergrad, or was it classes that you took that you really were attracted to that, those sort of topics?
That's a good question. So I took 580. I did the sort of the intro thesis, or sort of like the preparatory class for writing a thesis. And then I didn't actually end up writing a thesis, but I do think the seminar where I got exposed to a lot of research and I was reading a paper for every class, I think that's when I realized I was really interested in the topic material. So yeah, it was mostly through that.
Great, thank you. We have students all the time that are like, how do I gain research experience, or how do I get exposure? And there's so many different ways, but yeah, that 580 and 581 class, I think, can be super helpful. Yemi, yeah, what advice do you have for people maybe wanting to get in at General Mills, or the types of roles that you've worked in?
Yeah, absolutely. So our entry-level position, at least in sales, is called a business management associate. And really what you're doing is you're supporting our customer account managers with business insights, business diagnostics, and business trends to understand how effective the strategies that they're running at their customers and their retailers are, and how to change them if necessary. And then we have a form of training that's called consultative selling, is what we call how we sell to our customers. And so everyone will ask me like, okay, well, do you go into the stores and like, do you go talk to store managers? And we do have an arm of our organization that does that, but that's not what this side of the business does. And so what we do, we meet with buyers at headquarters of our retailers. So I work at Target. If we were in person, I would literally walk 10 blocks to the Target headquarters because I live downtown. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to help them understand how to best sell to consumers of our brands using data to tell a story. So we go through a training called, I think it's called like storytelling with data, or storytelling with sales, because data is just numbers until you interpret it and you understand it. So I would recommend being very strong in analytics and being able to communicate what the data is saying, so that you can tell someone who has never seen the data before what it's telling them, so that they don't have to read it themselves. And then secondly, I would say, like I mentioned before, it's very collaborative. I cannot do what I do on a daily basis without talking to at least 3 different people of different teams in different functions. And I might also link this other article in the chat. It's called Only Connect by William Cronin. And we had to read it in the business school. And I'm not sure if that's just a general thing. at UW, but it really talks about what a liberal arts education is supposed to do. And it's supposed to make you and help you make connections between different things in the world. And so I think one of the examples that he uses in the article, and I might be making it up, but I think about it all the time, is, you're at a dinner party, or you're talking with a group of people, and there's one different person from a different background or a different function, a different industry, all in that group. Are you able to talk to each one of those people because you're able to make connections with different things, because you have that breadth and you have that ability. So I think making connections, being collaborative, communicating, and then lastly, being able to tell a story with data, are all things that I do on a daily basis, and that what we do here at General Mills.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, that storytelling piece is huge, right? I know Elizabeth, my colleague, and I, we, have all this data. And so sometimes it's like, okay, here's the information about students or what they're interested in, and how does this influence what we're doing day to day and things like that. So yeah, it's you have all these data points. What's the story you want to make, or how do you interpret it? So when you're doing that, are there any certain tools that you use or that you recommend students kind of build experience in? I know some of our other alums have said get to know Excel, or Tableau or Python. Are there anything that and this can be for either of you here, any of those tools that you use day to day that you would encourage students to brush up on before they graduate?
Yeah, Excel is a big one. I'm frequently Googling Excel formulas. So if you have the opportunity to take an Excel class, highly recommend it, because I need to take a refresher course. And then we use Nielsen. I'm not sure if that's an opportunity for students to get into, but we use Nielsen. IRI is another one. And then we do use Tableau as well. So any one of those systems will definitely give you a leg up.
I completely agree with Excel. That was something that we still use at the bank too. I would say a lot of times it's good just to know at least something. You don't want to come in not knowing what a for loop is, because a lot of languages, it's like Python to Julia, you can figure that out with some time and you'll get better. And I think a lot of times, if you're not a comp sci major, they're not necessarily expecting you to be an expert with Python. Certainly for my position, a lot of it's we expect you to learn this stuff. So it's good to have some sort of background in it, but it's not necessarily that you have to know a specific language. I would know something though. You should, it's good to have programming experience.
Yeah, I think Excel is a big one. A lot of times students, I think, are oh, I know how to put information in these individual cells in Excel. But then if you ask them, do you know how to use pivot tables or VLOOKUP, or even just, simple, formulas and things like that, they're what? And so I just put in the link in the chat, the link to Do It. They offer free software training for students. So they offer virtual classes right now, but then also there's a link for LinkedIn Learning. I apologize if it's loud. I live kind of by the airport, and so there's planes going over. But LinkedIn Learning is a really great resource. And I don't know if either of you get that through your work, but there's free software training for just about anything, and also some topical things too. So if you're wanting to learn more about marketing insights or even just financial basics or things like that, lots of really good topical as well as technical tools through those trainings. So I encourage the students to check that out. So we are kind of wrapping up here. I know, Joel, there was one more question for you. And so I'm going to kind of pose this kind of broadly as our last question before we end, or I guess two questions. One, I'm wondering if either of you would be willing to, if you're open to chatting with students or open to emails, if you want to put your email in the chat box, and so students could have them if they want to connect with you. I know you're both on LinkedIn as well, but if you're open to that, please do that. But then my last question is, what do people in your role typically end up doing, in moving on to? So I know, Joel, you had said PhD program, but then also kind of what are your own career goals? Where do you see this is like an interview. Where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? Because it sounds like you guys both have interests and things like that, but I also think it's really great for undergrads to know that it's not just about that first job. That first job is important, but then that's just a starting point to then something else, and you kind of learn as you go along. So Joel, I'll let you start after that long question.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of RAs get PhDs. I don't know the exact fraction. It's probably more than half go on to like an Econ PhD program. And then I think a pretty solid amount become sort of private sector. They go into the private sector and they do data analysis there. But I think some of them do other graduate degrees and stuff like computer science as well. So it's pretty broad. And again, that's part of what attracted me to the position, was that there were a lot of doors still open and I didn't feel like I was really burrowing into something. Sorry, there's another question? I'm sorry, I got lost in my train.
No. I that was a very long question.
Very good.
So where do you see yourself? Like, again, I know you just graduated, but in 5 years from now, are there things that you're kind of like, okay, next step might be A, B, or C?
Yeah, I think at this point for me, it's graduate school. I would say graduate school, but we'll see.
Yeah. Again, I'm putting a lot of pressure on you with a few months after graduation.
Figure it out, Joel. Figure it out.
Yeah. Come on.
I really should. I am kind of slow to the ball on this stuff.
So. No, not at all.
That's why I'm a career advisor, because I can just like vicariously live through all my students of everything that they're doing.
Well, I was going to say, I kind of hope, Joel, you pop back up and you're like, well, I went back to the fantasy football gambling. That's what I ended up doing. You see, there's no one path for anybody. For me, at General Mills in sales, we have a very structured career path. And so we have 4 experiences that we need to have before we get to this position called product sales manager. And the product sales manager is the liaison between the sales organization and our marketing organization. And what they do, they're basically a consultant to marketing for when they want to launch a new item, when they want to launch a new brand. They'll be the sales voice in the room, and they will provide information that is needed to understand what it's going to take to make it work at certain customers. So for example, you have a product sales manager on Totino's Hot Snacks for Target and Walmart. If Totino's Hot Snacks wants to launch a new item, they need to understand, okay, what's the margin requirements? What is our production minimum runs going to need to be? How much volume are we going to need Walmart to commit to in order to ship this new item to make the financials and the profitability work? So that gets a little more into the strategy side of things, but I myself want to work a little more with the consumer side. So even taking it a step prior to understanding what's going to make it work in sales is, why are we even launching this new item in the first place? Who is our target consumer? What are their demographics? What's their income? What's their makeup? I want to understand consumer behavior and why people do what they do, just because I'm really interested in it. Maybe it's because I have control issues. Who knows? Maybe I should go diagnose that a little bit more. But that's just what I'm personally interested in. So I would love to be product sales manager before I go get my MBA, just because it gives you kind of more of a peek under the tent. I always describe my career as, with each new role that I get, it's like a bigger can of worms opens up and you understand like how business really works. And so I feel like that product sales manager is kind of that perfect blend between execution and strategy.
Awesome. Thank you guys both for sharing all of this kind of like personal information and your journeys and your goals. And sorry if I put pressure on you, like, what are you going to do next? What are you going to do next? But that's like always like whenever I go to pre-COVID, like dinner parties, or like I'd be meeting someone, I'd be like, well, what do you do? Well, what are you going to do with that? Where are you going to go next? I think I'm like, I need to turn off my career advising-ness sometimes. But thank you both, yes, so much. I'm sorry we kind of are a few minutes over, but thank you for taking your time after a busy work day to share your experiences. I took notes of some of the advice of like taking advantage of opportunities, casting a wide net, preparation and opportunity, right? You have to prepare and kind of take advantage of these opportunities, and things will open up, right? So being kind of open to those new experiences. And then having that energy and enthusiasm, right? Like you got to bring it when you have those interviews too. So those are kind of some of the big takeaways that I had for this evening. But yes, thank you again for taking the time. Go Badgers, on Wisconsin, be healthy, be well. And thank you. Yeah, and thank you for sharing your emails and everything too. So
Absolutely.
Have a great night.
Yep. Have a good night.
No, thanks for having me.
Bye.
See y'all.
Bye.